I don't want to bother you too much with numbers, but I have on the first slide some information about the importance of our bilateral trade relationship. Swiss exports to the US is a huge amount of money. It's at 10% of total Swiss exports. So after the EU, the US is the second important partner for the Swiss export industry. And also the imports from the US are significant. Also important are the trade in services. If you look at the numbers, they are quite substantial. And in the trade with services, that includes primarily financial services, but also tourism and corporate services. And last but not least, the foreign direct investment in the US and also from the US in Switzerland is very important. About 20% of our foreign direct investment is here in the US. So the US is, of course, a very important partner also with regard to investment. I have highlighted here the composition of the trade in goods, the categories of the main trade items. It's more or less the same pattern for exports and imports. So pharmaceutical chemicals are the most important category in the trade of goods, and there is a lot of intra-industry trade because the chemical and pharmaceutical industry is very global, and the trade within big multinational companies plays an important role. Here another categorization of the trade flows. You see consumer goods are about half of the trade flows in goods. Capital goods, imports and exports are about 1/3. And raw materials, semi-manufacturers, that's the intra-industry component of the trade, is about 15 to 17%. So the trade pattern, exports from Switzerland to the US and exports from the US to Switzerland is very similar. The US is a very important market for Swiss multinational companies. Among the big companies doing business in the US, the share of their business here is up to 45%. So Swiss Re does almost half of its business worldwide in the US. And also chemical and pharmaceutical industry is very important in the US. On this slide, I have highlighted the number of employees of Swiss multinational companies here in the US. And it's quite a substantial number. In total, there are 332,000 employees at workforce here in the US. And chemical, pharmaceutical, and financial industry is also very prominent here in the US. As a comparison, US companies in Switzerland employ about 26,000 people in Switzerland. Switzerland is one of the most important investors here in the US. Here's a ranking of foreign direct investment in the US, and it's amazing that Switzerland, as a relatively small economy, has invested even more than a country such as France. So our position here in the US is the 6th position overall, and it emphasizes the importance of the US for the Swiss economy. Let's turn to the financial companies in the US. There are basically four big companies doing business here in the US. There are, which are important. It's the UBS. And with UBS, we have had quite a lot of troubles here in the US. You may know that UBS did quite wrong and helped US residents to evade taxes. That was a big issue when I came here, and it kept me quite busy for a longer period of time. But now the issue is off the table. We concluded an agreement, the Swiss government and the US government concluded an agreement with regard to administrative assistance, and we handed over about 4,000 bank client data. That means 4,000 data with regard to US tax evaders. And we concluded this agreement in 2009 and handed over the last data in last November. So now the UBS case is fortunately off the table, and UBS paid a high price, a high penalty, and it had also a reputational impact on the Swiss financial industry as a whole. The second point I would like to mention is the revision of the Double Taxation Convention that was signed in 2009. It was an important step. The Double Taxation Convention is a very important tool and helps to avoid double taxation when doing business between the US and Switzerland. So for the business community, it's a very important treaty. And we revised this treaty, and Switzerland adopted the OECD standard for information exchange in tax matters. So Switzerland now gives administrative assistance in tax matters if tax evasion is concerned. Before that, there was a distinction between tax fraud and tax evasion, and now it's only tax fraud and tax evasion that is a matter for administrative assistance. So we now have this international standard that is a worldwide standard for information exchange in tax matters. Up to now, the Senate hasn't yet, the US Senate hasn't yet approved this new convention, whereas the Swiss Parliament approved it last year. So we are waiting for the US Senate in order to put in force this new convention. The third point I would like to mention is a new law that was enacted last year by Congress. And I realized that in the US this is not that much an issue, but for foreign financial institutions it's a big issue, and for foreign governments. The act is called the Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act, short FATCA, which is basically an agreement between a foreign financial institution and the tax authority, the IRS, to deliver information about US taxpayers. And the problem with this act is that the implementation and compliance costs are huge and has to be paid by the foreign financial institutions. Furthermore, there is a conflict of law because there is an extraterritorial impact of this US law in other countries, such as Switzerland. So in Switzerland, we have to adjust our law to allow our financial institutions to conclude an agreement with the IRS. So, and this FATCA will come into force rather soon in 2013. So there is not much time to implement all this information exchange mechanism. And last but not least, there is another law called the Dodd-Frank Act that is an overhaul of the financial market regulation and has also an impact on Swiss financial firms doing business in the US, especially the bigger ones, such as UBS, Credit Suisse, and Swiss Re in Zurich. It's well possible that they may be considered as systemically important, and that would imply a stronger regulation here in the US.